What a guest we've got, Martin O'Neill.
Hello, young man.
Thanks very much for coming. I'm actually a wee bit scared. You were my first manager. Everyone at the club was kind of scared of you. Were you aware of that back in the day?
Yeah, probably was. Yeah, I know. The most important thing was for me to scare the first team, the senior players, not the young lads. You know? But yeah, I think I was pretty aware.
Have that kind of hold over the full club.
Well, I think that what happened in the first place when Dermot Desmond gave me the job, Dermot being the major shareholder, he actually said to me, "I want you to take ownership of the football club." By that he meant just like run the football club, as he might have one of his business managers doing something for him, and that of course that gave me great confidence that he wanted me to do that, and really from top to bottom I wanted to be in charge. It was really as simple as that. And I think you feel, I think nowadays in the current game, some managers don't even sign the players. But you know, there wasn't a player at Celtic. I'm not talking about you being a kid and things that you see. That was really Tommy Burns as much as anything else. Yeah. But I'm talking about senior players coming into the football club. I wanted to sign them.
Well, it was probably one of the most insignificant days in your tenure at the club, but I actually signed for Celtic and went into your office with Mum and Dad, with Tommy Burns.
Yes, I remember that, absolutely. And the great thing about Tommy was obviously a legendary figure as well too, but Tommy could go into any household, you know, and be able to coax the mum and dad for the play if they're good enough to sign. So obviously you must have been good enough.
Well, I know how he done it because my dad actually fell out with my mum for flirting with Tommy. I think that was a secret. I think so. I wanted to ask you, as I say, you were like a mythical guy at the club. Everyone kind of, there was even rumours about you, so I wanted to ask you about a few that I heard when I was younger.
Okay, right.
You used to go into the club late at night to watch American football. Is that true?
If it was, sometimes it was on. I wouldn't say that it was the very, very latest match, but let's say generally speaking, those games were played on a Sunday, and we, as you might remember, we had a lot of games. If Rangers were playing on the Saturday, we would be playing on the Sunday. And sometimes then, let's say it was a Sunday evening, and in those days, my early days then, Sky TV were covering the Sunday games, and they would be 6 o'clock kickoff. So by the time that, let's say we were travelling to, let's say Dundee, we were playing at Tannadice, for instance, which was my first game, then chances are by the time you get back again from Celtic, you still want to unwind, as it were. And the best thing was to watch some American football. But yeah, I loved it, and I still do.
And another one that you used to go and watch court cases in the High Court in Glasgow, is that true?
Once or twice, I must admit, I did do. Yeah, I obviously enjoyed that part of it as well too. But probably not as many as people are making out to be. But yes, I did.
Right, we'll start at the start. So you weren't a Celtic fan growing up. You were a Sunderland fan. Why was that?
So what happened was this here, that where I was born in Northern Ireland, growing up as an Irish Catholic, the chances are you would be a Celtic supporter, and if you were a Protestant, you would be a Rangers supporter. So Celtic was very, very much ingrained in our family. Absolutely. You know, when I was a boarder at St Columb's College way back in 1967, we all the boarders sat round to watch the European Cup final, the great side of Jock Steins. So yeah, but again, growing up then, you would also have to pick an English team. Everyone picked an English team. And I think I was the only person who picked Sunderland as a supporter. And the reason being was that they had a big Irishman playing for them at centre-back called Charlie Hurley. And Charlie Hurley was my favourite player. But most of the time I was supporting Sunderland, they were actually in the second division. So no wonder nobody else was supporting them. And that was the reason. And strangely enough, or ironically enough, Charlie Hurley, just about 10 years ago, was voted Player of the Century by Sunderland fans. Isn't that really, you know?
Wow,
so that's a big thing. Yeah. So I was a really big Sunderland fan, but to say that, you know, from where you grew up and your background in Northern Ireland, then you had to be a big Celtic fan as well.
You spoke about that European Cup final. Obviously the Lisbon Lions at that time, the club were about a lot. You've seen a lot of the Lisbon Lions. How was your relationship with they type of guys?
I honestly, my first what shall I say, my first meeting with any Lisbon Lion was Tommy Gemmell. Tommy Gemmell came to Nottingham Forest in my first year at Nottingham Forest. Now, Tommy was probably past his best at that time. His great Celtic days were over. But he came down to us in 1971, scored a couple of really brilliant goals, but didn't stop Nottingham Forest from being relegated. So I would have had a conversation or two with Tommy. I remember once saying to him, Tommy, that was a great goal you scored in the, he said, in the European Cup final. And Tommy retorted, he said, which one, son? Because I hadn't realised he had also scored in 1970 as well, too, against Feyenoord. But no, that was been my first. Then I met Jimmy Johnson, believe it or not. Jimmy Johnson was playing in a reserve game for Sheffield United, definitely at the end of his career. He picked up a bit of an injury. He came into the treatment room at City Ground. I was watching the game from the stand, and I just had to come down, sneak in and see Jimmy Johnson, Now, he was being attended to by a couple of the Sheffield United, the doctor, the physiotherapist. But just to sit in, didn't speak to him, just looked in and saw the great Jimmy Johnson sitting there in a treatment table. So fast forward then a couple of years later, when I'm manager of Celtic, and I kind of got the feeling, I might be wrong about this, but I kind of got the feeling that Celtic 67 side were almost forgotten about. That's forgotten about would be too strong a word, but felt as if they deserved their place back at Celtic Park again. And so really, I just wanted to, I had a night out with them. I invited them out for a meal one night. Fortunately, I had to pay. And but they were really terrific, talking about their stories, talking about the final in Lisbon, when they won the cup, and then they're besieged by everyone. And suddenly, when Billy McNeill holds up the cup, there's no other Celtic player around. And I used to wonder where were all the Celtic players? So they tell us the story that Billy McNeill had to go right round the far side of the stadium, collect the cup, and the other players couldn't get there. So many people were preventing them from doing so. So in that sort of chaos, it was so funny and it was so brilliant to hear stories that I hadn't known about. But you could sense then, even with the banter going on, that they actually, they had much respect for each other.
Who was Bertie the funniest? I remember you and him were quite close, weren't you?
Absolutely. Bertie would have been the funniest. And Bertie would always wanted... I think that Bertie stopped people from having their own punchlines. Bertie would move in himself. As you know, that Auld would always do this. He wouldn't let the boys finish the story. He finished it for them, even though he wasn't involved in the story, So, but Auld he was a funny guy. Absolutely.
Last one, just because it's connected to my time at club as well. John Clark, what a hero of a guy.
Absolutely.
Would you have banter about 2 European Cups, 1 European Cup?
No. I had so much respect for John Clark. Really good footballer, very, quiet, but knew the game. And after matches were over, often, John was the kit man cleaning up the things. After I had when the players would disappear off to, let's say, the players' room or whatever the case may be, and I'm talking both home and away, I would go in to see John, just talk about the game, just the two of us, just sitting down there while he was putting some things together. Clarkie was great, loved Clarkie, really. He was so self-effacing, never boasted at all about his own career. He was just magical character, genuinely, and he was my favourite.
Brilliant. You nearly had the opportunity to go to Celtic in your younger years. Jock's team came over to Northern Ireland. So what happened?
Right, okay. So what happened, Jock sent over a scout, and I obviously he did, because he told me some years later. I didn't play very well in the game, and so the scout must have gone back and told him I was crap, So, so fast forward again a number of years, and I saw Jock in Northern Ireland. He was presenting some prizes at the end of a football game, and I happened to be in the vicinity, so I come up to see him, introduce myself. I was playing for Nottingham Forest at the time, and he was very gracious, and I think I mentioned to him about I know that Celtic scout come over, but in those days Celtic would have been sending scouts all over the place. And whether he remembered or didn't remember, it's really immaterial. The fact that I got to talk to him was good enough for me.
Incredible manager. Another incredible manager that you played under, Brian Clough. Mm-hmm. Was that a rocky relationship between you two?
Yeah. It seemed to be, and I must admit now, even looking back on it, it was. I was probably craving for his approval all the time. As a footballer, sometimes this yourself. Some manager that you step into doesn't really fancy you to begin with, and you are striving so hard to to turn the tables, as it were, to make that manager, because he's going to be picking you or leaving you out of the team, and you desperately are craving for that approval. So, but I wasn't the only one. All the younger players at Forest were desperately seeking that moment where he said, "Well done, son." Brilliant manager. There's no question that his record is there with anyone. Winning the European Cup twice with a provincial club like Nottingham Forest.
Incredible.
Winning the league with Derby County as well. Being in the semi-final of the European Cup with Derby. His record is there. But it wasn't just his record. It was his the way he talked to you as much as anything else. And he had you talked about saying about me going into a dressing room where the players stay silent. But I'm telling you, we listened to every word he had to say. Have
you got any most memorable team talks or things that he said to you?
I think his team talks would vary, but they were not long. They weren't long. He did not go on for 10 or 15 minutes. By the time someone that might have done that, and I do know managers who went on a long time, and then has not only lost the thread of their own arguments, but have lost the players completely. You know this yourself. You have there is a certain length of time in your mind that you can take things in. Don't give a player 15 instructions before the game, because he'll forget 14 of them.
Yeah.
You will, honestly. But 3 instructions is maximum. And Clough, for a complicated man, he preached simplicity. But his team talks would vary. I must admit, he could dish out praise, he could criticise, and also, but you had to take it. I'm not so sure now the current players would be able to take the sort of criticism that was meted out to all of us at different stages, and not just by him, but by other managers as well. So it's one of those things, you had to take it. And the reason I think you had to take it is because the players in my day had no power whatsoever, none whatsoever. The power was with the manager in the club. Whether the manager was any good or not, he dictated. And I've seen this as a big change in the game. Now the players have too much power, and the difference is, when we were playing, we should have had more power, and now the players should have less power.
So would you never send him back to Martin?
Well, I did do, but obviously to my what shall I say? Well, let me put it this way: I shouldn't have done. All right, a number of occasions I shouldn't have done. In fact, remember John Robertson? John, who was my assistant, a great footballer at Nottingham Forest, really great. Used to sit beside me, and when Clough would start off on something, and I would try and make some sort of answer, I got this little tug from John, as if to say, "Don't say anything, just leave it, just leave it." Unfortunately, at times I should have done. I should have listened to John, and then trying to answer back, you get yourself into an absolute tiz, because you're not going to win with him. You're not going to win with him. And if you argue too much, you know what? He's got the power to leave you out for the second half, So just, unfortunately, I learned far too late not to argue.
So that's maybe the bad side, but is there any good side that shaped you as a manager that you see yourself in Clough?
Of course. I think, well, first of all, his success for a start. It's really important. And I think if you are, again, I think that you will think this yourself, that you look at successful people first of all, and if you think, well, they're successful, then you start to analyse them a bit more than the people who are less successful. I think that's just a natural thing, and then you start to think the things that might have made someone successful, it might not necessarily work for you, but you can see their mode of thinking as much as anything else. Now, don't try and be that person. Genuinely be yourself. And I know that sounds so hackneyed, it's untrue, but be yourself. You have your own thoughts in it. Yes, you learn things from managers, both good and bad, but honestly, be your own character, because eventually, if you're trying to be something else, it will catch you out in the most inopportune moments, when in actual fact you will lose the plot and you will lose the dressing room.
So what was the one thing that made him special then? Tactics, man management, how he spoke.
Right. Well, you've named 3 there, and I wouldn't disagree with any of them. Tactically, he was not known for that, but he was as astute as any manager I've known, and any coach. He coached during the course of matches. He didn't go out in an afternoon and take the players out and have them out in a training session. He didn't. But he coached during the games. But the interesting thing during the cut and thrust of big matches, you learn more. And if you've made mistakes in those games, and he comes in and tells you about these mistakes, and not just tells you about them, emphasizes these mistakes, I think you tend to learn that a wee bit more quickly than somebody telling you on a coaching field. That's my view. You mentioned the other things, charisma. You had it in
bundles.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the way he spoke. Yeah, I'm not saying he was a big wordsmith. He didn't. He might not have had the same vocabulary as Terry Wogan or someone like that there. But at the end of the day, you knew exactly where you stood, and what your job was supposed to be.
Right, on to the Celtic job. Prior to your appointment, it seemed pretty much that Gus Hiddink was the favourite for the Celtic job. Did you think your chance had maybe gone? Was it something you were looking at for a distance?
No. What had happened now was it was the summer of 2000. I was very happy at Leicester City, and we had just won the League Cup. We were going to be playing in European football again. We'd finished for the 4th consecutive year in the top 10. And for Leicester City, that was, we were doing really well. Obviously, they've gone and won the Premier League in 2016, so that makes a difference. But up until then, we were the most successful side that Leicester had. So, and I was enjoying myself, really good. Then I get a call from Sir Alex Ferguson saying, "Listen, would you take a call from Dermot Desmond? What's this?" He said, "Would you be interested in managing Celtic?" Of course, absolutely. He said, "Well, I've recommended you." I think Sir Alex had recommended 3 people to him, but Dermot chose me, and I hadn't realised till much later that Gus Hiddink was very much in consideration for it. And I suppose if Dermot had decided to choose someone else, then I would have never had the privilege of managing the club. But thankfully, he took me.
So did you just accept it? Did you accept it straight away after the first meeting with Dermot Desmond?
Oh yeah, but he came on the phone just after Sir Alex went off. Said to me, "Would you meet with the board on the Monday night?" Because that was a Sunday. I said, "Absolutely." So I met in London, and yeah, so for the first time, I think I must have done all right in the interview. I'm usually not so good in these, and. But so they said, "Would you manage the club?" Yeah.
So what was it that made you made that decision? Because now, if people would look at it coming from a Premier League club to Celtic, it doesn't really happen in this day and age. I know the Premier League's moved on massively, but you're at a Premier League club. Why
okay,
Celtic?
Well, you've touched on it early on. First of all, my background for a start, and if I couldn't play for Celtic, then probably the second best thing is to try and manage them. So I think that. That was a really big pull. I thought I knew everything about Celtic. Sometimes by the time you arrive there, it might be a different story. But really, it was an enormous privilege. So I did want to manage Celtic Football Club, and of course, template is set really with Jock himself. But if you could get some success, and Celtic, I know they stopped 10 in a row, but they had some fallow days, hadn't they? Really, they've been really, really not so good. So I was hoping then that if I could get the things together, we could wrest maybe the championship away from Rangers. Maybe not first time of asking, I don't know, because Rangers were really strong. But you get back to the point about why Celtic. Absolutely wanted to do it, because Celtic is, to me, one of the biggest clubs in the world, and if they were in the Premier League, as they were talking about, it's not going to happen in my lifetime anyway. But if in the Premier League, they and Rangers would be massive football clubs. Maybe not immediately, but in a couple of years. they would be able to. Celtic could go from 60,000 people to 80,000 overnight. No doubt at all about it.
And when you agreed to take the job, I wanted to ask you about Lenny. He was obviously my manager after you'd left. Lenny then became my manager as well. Was he always in your thinking of taking me?
Very much so, yeah, absolutely. Again, for Lenny's background, Lenny was a big Celtic fan as well too, from County Armagh. I'd taken him from Crewe Alexander to Leicester City. He was fantastic for me at Leicester, really fantastic. And I knew that if I could get him up there, it would just be. I think it would be just a match. It'd be something that he'd be needing. Now, I tried in the summertime when I became manager. It didn't materialise. I think the manager at Leicester at the time was Peter Taylor. He wanted to keep Lenny, and then suddenly out of the blue, around about end of November, beginning of December time of the same year, I get a call from Peter Taylor saying, well, listen, if you still want Neil Lennon. Do I still want Neil Lennon? Absolutely. And so up he comes.
Do you remember the phone call telling him, sorry, interrupt, do you remember the phone call saying to Lenny, you're coming up to Celtic?
I think that what had happened is that Peter Taylor had said to him, he said that I have phoned, I think this was the order of events. I'm going back 20 years ago. Yeah. My memory might not be as good as yours, young man. So I think the order of events was, obviously Peter would have told him that would he still have interest in going up to Celtic. I'm sure Lenny said yes, and then I get the call from Peter Taylor, and then obviously we pass on. We have to still agree a fee at the time before I'd probably get speaking to him properly. But I think Lenny was really keen to come up, and that's great. So in other words, sometimes if it didn't happen immediately, sometimes players maybe might lose a bit of interest. But not Neil. And to me, his signing around about his first game was at Dundee, and we scored a late goal. Didier Agathe scored a late goal, big win for us. I'm sure Lenny thought, geez, this is a wee bit more difficult than he might have thought. Hard games. But he soon settled down, and he was a big player for us. Really.
Talking about you first coming to the club, that first day with all the fans outside the stadium, do you get that at other clubs? Obviously you've managed a number of clubs. Do you get that sort of reception anywhere else?
Well, I think that most of the clubs you're kind of really well received, but Celtic fans, I think that night coming where they were gathered outside, and and I think that one of the board members said, hey, listen, they're not going to disperse until you go out and say something to them, so. And all I could say was that I'd do my utmost to try and bring some success to the club. But that was, really a big moment, because I think then, first of all that day, and then about a couple of months later, when I went to a Celtic supporters club meeting in Perth up near, obviously for St Johnstone. And I went that night, and those two, obviously we had played Rangers in the meantime. But I think that night at Perth, I realised what Celtic Football Club meant to Celtic supporters. It's their life, and it became rather daunting in many aspects, because you felt as if that their life, your results, can shape their lives, even for the weekend, And honestly, it was. I think after Perth, I think it was more harrowing than anything else. You feel, gosh almighty, because that night, let's say there was about 150 people at their particular function. I'm telling you, at least 130 had season tickets. So it was incredible, really, honestly. And John Robertson came with me that night. Both, when we left, we were playing the next day, and so going back to the hotel where the team were staying, we thought, my word,
incredible.
Absolutely. If you'd known that, I might have stayed in the Midlands,
Talking to John Robertson, how important was he to you? I remember he used to join in training, didn't he? He was still incredible.
He could
Steve
play.
Alford as well.
Absolutely. John was still a really fine player. My excuse was that my knee was really bad. So some of the players, and it was bad because I'd never got my cruciate ever fixed. And therefore I sometimes had to wear one of those big braces when I did join in. But I think the players must have thought, I don't think he's ever played the game, But in terms of John playing, John was excellent, still shouting for the ball. really remonstrating with some of the players as well too for not passing it to him. It was really great. And then you had the complete opposite with Lubo Moravcik. Lubo used to play at the back, sit at the back, just
stroke it a bit,
stroke it about. Absolutely, but never came alive in the training. Just thought that's it.
Did that bother you, Martin?
No, do you know what? It never bothers you when you know what players can do on the pitch. And my early, what shall I say, dealings with Lubo, when I told Lubo you needed to run around a bit on the ways, and Lubo looked at me as if to say, no, just get me the ball. I can deal with the ball. And but once you know players, then and you know their little foibles and you know what makes players tick, honestly, the training sessions, you want them to be fine, but you will forgive some players because you know that the following day they're going to be at it.
Remember the day he controlled it with his backside?
I wasn't there. I wasn't the manager at the time, but I've heard about it. Absolutely, just brilliant.
My memory of John Robertson is always down the tunnel.
John down the tunnel. Yeah, I'll tell you a story, John. When we were Aston Villa together, we were playing Chelsea in this game, and there's a little area just it must be down the tunnel. I'm not exactly sure since I'm a non-smoker myself, but there must have been a little area down where you actually were able to have a fag at the time. And John of course used to get nervous before the matches. And so the players are out warming up or whatever it is, and John's in a little corner. He tells me the story because I didn't know this at the time. And we are playing Chelsea, and I'll tell you who the manager was in a second. The next thing you know, John's having a cigarette, and he gets a tap on the shoulder, and he said, "Can I join you?" And it was Ancelotti.
Wow.
Ancelotti wants to join him for a cigarette. He was the manager of Chelsea at the time. So fascinating, really. I wasn't there. I only have John's word for it, but it did happen.
Right. Just talking to the Celtic squad when you first took over, what was your first impressions of them?
Not fantastic, I must admit. Yeah, not really great. A few problems, really. I could see maybe, and sometimes it's unfair to make judgments so quickly, and I try not to do that. But if you've got very little time to work with a team, then that's the time that training sessions are really important. When you first come into a football club, you want to have the players at it all the time. And our first couple of matches, particularly one when we were in Leipzig and it was not Leipzig of nowadays, a Bundesliga side. I think they were in the 3rd division, but they give us a mauling. And I thought this was going to be a long, hard season, We were just not up to it, and I can understand, really, and I know it was only pre-season, and I know they're friendly matches, but you could see why Rangers had demolished Celtic the previous year, because you felt as if you need a lot of things. We might need some extra players for a start, which I knew about, and you also needed to instill a lot of desire and heart into the team. Some players, some of the older players who are brilliant professionals, and Tommy Boyd, was one of them. And I used to ask Tommy, what had happened? He said, well, of the previous year. And he said, well, we got behind early, lost confidence, and really couldn't cope. So I kept thinking about that during my time. And I thought, well, let's not try and fall behind too early. And as it turns out, we were able to win early matches. So by the time that we got to play in this big 6-2 victory, we'd actually won our matches beforehand and won brilliantly in the previous week at Hearts, So that was really important for us, And so you're never sure that you're ready for Rangers, particularly because I thought they were very strong. But that day, everything just went went with us.
I just wanted to ask you about one player who was there still under contract, Mark Viduka.
Yeah,
Did you want to keep Viduka?
I wanted to keep him. Yeah, absolutely. But the amazing thing about it, if Mark Viduka had wanted to stay at the football club, chances are Chris Sutton would never have appeared. You know, it wouldn't have happened. Yeah. Absolutely. Now Viduka's a very, very fine player. I wanted him to stay at the club, of course, because you feel as if he's a natural footballer, a really good goal scorer. But he had no interest in staying at Celtic at the time.
Did you try and convince him, Martin?
I did, yes. Yeah. I made a phone call to him. He was actually in Australia at the time, you know. And I said, basically said that, should you not be here? Oh, I'm not coming back to Celtic. And it's almost as if he was dictating things when in actual fact he probably should have been. I think that's when I jokingly said, where are you phoning from? He said, from Melbourne. I said, I assume you'll not be training tomorrow morning with us. So, but anyway, Mark, I did then say to Mark, that's fine. Okay, if you want to go, that's okay. I said, there's an offer. There was two £6 million offer for him. There was one from Leeds United and there was one from a Spanish team. I just, honestly, just at this minute. So he had a choice. Didn't matter where he was going to go. He went to Leeds, did really super footballer. But in all honesty, I turned the money over for Chris Sutton, who was, and I probably don't give him enough credit in the book. Maybe because maybe I was nearly going to say he didn't deserve it. He does. He was a landscape changer for us because he hit it off immediately with Henrik Larsson. If Chris hadn't come immediately to the football club, let's say he'd gone maybe 6, 7, 8 games before we got him, we might not have won those early matches. And Sutton's performances for us, although I don't like to tell him, because he's got a big enough head as it is.
Played everywhere for you, didn't he? Remember
he could play
mid, centre back.
The second year when we signed John Hartson, I signed John primarily because if Henrik or Chris got injured for any given time, we wouldn't have had enough firepower. So John signs for the football club. Said, John, it's up to you to break this partnership up. And I knew that Chris could play in, as you say, in a number of positions. But Sutton was genuinely a landscape changer for his relationship, both on and off the field with Henrik, was really crucial.
How did you find his personality? Because with us as kids, he was ruthless, but in a funny way. So he would tell us if you were working in the Royal Mail, like with handing the mail out, he'd say, you better get used to this because you'll be working in the Royal Mail now.
That's him. That is Sutton. He's never changed.
Would he be the same with you?
Not with me. No, not with me, but with the rest of the players. Absolutely. He was exactly that. He would be the very first one. If you'd spot something, did you say when they're handing out the mail, is that what he said?
He used to say to your young boys, you better get used to this because you'll be working as a postman next year.
Absolutely. That is Sutton. Absolutely. He did say once he would never go into punditry. You'd never catch him in punditry. Now he's on every station imaginable. But no, overall he was brilliant. He was very dry. He was very witty, but no, he didn't say too much to me in the dressing room, I must admit.
Would you have a personal relationship with Sutton? Would it be similar to yours with Clough? Maybe a love-hate relationship.
Do you know what I had? I think with the players, I think I had a personal relationship with all the players in an impersonal way. So I'm going to explain that to you. I let John Robertson, Steve Walford get really close to the players. That's important for them, and for the players to trust John and Steve. So I used to say to them, John, unless something really, really serious has happened with the players, don't let me know. Don't really. So the players got a real trust in the lads, and John and Steve, they weren't reporting back every 2 minutes, oh, by the way, he didn't do this or didn't do that or something like this here. And so when the players really got to trust them, I thought it was good. It's not to say that I stayed aloof from players, I didn't, but I didn't mind that little distance that we were. John and Steve could cover that for me, and then it would be important for me then to be the manager of the team. And I think it really did work well. But John, Steve and myself were so tight together that it was really, really good relationship. But getting back to whether you had a personal relationship with them, yes, I got to know them. I joked with them in the dressing room as much as anybody else. But you just felt that when the serious business came round, those players were ready for it.
Just on, as you spoke about the 6-2 game, had you ever been to a Celtic and Rangers game before that?
No, I'd never been to it. So the first experience really was exactly that. And we were 3-0 up in 11 minutes. And you know what? Honestly, all right, if somebody told me we were going to win 6-2, I would have enjoyed the rest of the game. But if somebody had told me that the referee is going to blow the final whistle in the 12th minute, I would have taken it. I would have taken it. It was one of those days that just everything was working for us. But you felt that Rangers were going to get back into the game. So, and there was two big moments in the match. One just before half time, when they had a goal ruled off for offside, and then a few minutes into the second half, where Larsson scores that brilliant goal. Sutton lays it off to him. tips it over there, and then and puts it over across his head. It was just fantastic, really. But if I tell you, and I might be exaggerating slightly, but not that much, that when Sutton scored the 6th goal with about 2 minutes to go, it was the first time I breathed a sigh of relief. I thought, we'll win now. We'll win now. So that was it. And you know what I think it did just in a moment? Obviously, a lot of Celtic fans say that was like a big turning point in Celtic's next number of years. And you know what? The more I think about it, it probably was. I'm not saying that moment I thought it was a turning point, but where it did do, it gave us confidence to go on. And even though we got well beaten by Rangers the next time in November time, where they were just far too strong for us, I felt that we had enough confidence about ourselves that we could pick ourselves up from that defeat and strive on. And that's exactly what we did.
Just on Larsson, how soon into your appointment, your tenure, did you realise how good he was?
I would say about a minute and a half.
What, the first time you seen him train?
No, he's top quality player. First of all, he was away with Sweden in the Euros, so I didn't see him immediately for a start. Secondly, he was just recovering, still trying to recover with a broken leg, and really the Swedish games that he was playing in there were just almost like a rehearsal for him coming into us. But he scores our opening goal at Tannadice in I think the 37th minute, where he bends it left foot into the net, and you knew you had a player. Yeah. Now, did I think he was as good as that there early on? That would be almost ridiculous of me to think that there. But the more that I was able to give him in terms of service, like Alan Thompson come to the football club, Didier Gat, Chris Sutton, and building a decent side, then you could see that Larsson had all of these things and more.
Yeah. You win a treble. How does somebody like Martin O'Neill? I've never heard you speak about this side thing. How would you celebrate a treble?
Well, that we had first of all, the most important thing was the League Cup. Actually, to start it off with, and we beat Kilmarnock in the final. So that's one trophy in the board, and at least then it's still there in the season, and you can park it. You park that off to the side, start really concentrating now in the league and the Scottish Cup. There was a period in the Scottish Cup where we were getting so far in front of Rangers that they were slipping away. So suddenly you felt, well, I know we won the league against St Mirren, but we could have won it maybe the next week or the week after that. We're definitely going to win the league, and therefore absolute and utter concentration into the Scottish Cup semi-final and final. So the only time we ever thought about a treble was when the referee blew that whistle, against Hibs, and we'd done it, and that was just fantastic. And I must admit, I hadn't realised, and didn't realise it for maybe that evening afterwards. It was the first time it had been won since the immortal Jock Stein in 1969.
Incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. They really didn't know that.
And what would you celebrate as a squad? Would you have a go? Would you like to be glass
absolutely. We went down to a place that night and did celebrate. Absolutely, really important. And then eventually, as the players take off in their own directions, with their own families and stuff like this here, then we're kind of left, John, myself and Steve, and Big Jim Henry as well, to our fitness coach. Absolutely. Yeah. We're all left to our own devices, and we think, yeah, okay, that was nice. Let's enjoy summer and let's start again next season.
Have you had to sum up your time at Celtic? What would your words be?
I absolutely loved it. Really loved it. It was this sounds rather sycophantic, but it's not meant to be. Real privilege to manage the football club. Obviously, you need to win. It's still been a privilege to manage the football club, but if you don't win the football matches, So, really great time. My family had a fantastic time. They've loved it. I have a daughter now who probably loves Celtic even more now than maybe she did when I was managing, which is kind of crazy. And yeah, absolutely, we had a time of our lives, my wife and I, at there. Big disappointment, obviously, losing the UEFA Cup final, then losing to Motherwell. Those things still haunt me as well. But you've just mentioned the treble. You've mentioned those days in Europe where we could easily have, for instance, Porto beat us in the final. They go on to win the Champions League with virtually the same team the next year. We really should have won that game that day, and that's massively disappointing. But if you're talking about a real privilege, and you know what, it's interesting to hear people talking about Seville and the great time that they had in Seville and the journey there. And I don't think they just meant the journey to Seville in the sense. I think they meant, you know, Blackburn Rovers, Liverpool, all of, you know, the games along the way, where we were really fighting for Scottish football, you know, against the English teams. But overall, it was fantastic. And honestly, as I said to you, my wife and I had the time of our lives here. And Glasgow still remains her favourite place.
See, just on the UEFA Cup final, is that your biggest disappointment in football?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
How was Mourinho? Were you angry with Mourinho after?
Well, I was angry with everyone. You know, I was angry with the referee. I don't think he dealt with it. I was angry with the Porto players who went down at every given minute. You know, angry with them when they scored a goal. I think they went back to Porto to celebrate. You know, it did about 25 minutes before the game kicked off again, and they were actually, you know. And the funny thing about their play acting, they didn't really have to do that. They were actually super players, you know. But it was, if you just look at the last 3 or 4 minutes of the game, which I'd hate to look back, when their goalkeeper goes down injured, and he stays down for about 4 minutes. The referee's too inexperienced, can't deal with it, really can't deal with it, and it was a monumental disappointment. So it's and sometimes it gets you feel even worse when a lot of supporters say it was the time of their lives. Seville was great. So Seville is talked about, you know, almost as if we had won. And we didn't.
Plenty of other incredible achievements. Martin, thanks very much.
It's a pleasure, man. Nice
Cheers,
to see
mate,
you.
thank you.
Absolutely. Okay.